More than 100,000 years ago, in our beautiful and warm Africa, human life began. For millennia, African people built the earliest and greatest civilizations on the planet. 10,000 years ago, we began domesticating animals and developing agriculture in several regions of the continent. When Europeans were still in caves, we were using fire and building sophisticated societies. 6,000 years ago, we created the first calendar, played musical instruments, designed jewelry, and mastered science, architecture, astronomy, mathematics, and poetry. Pyramids and the Great Sphinx are said to be about 5,000 years old, and many say much older than that. When King Tutankhamun was a child about 1300 BC, the great monuments of the Nile were already very ancient. For thousands of years, travelers and students journeyed to our Africa from all over the world to be healed by our doctors, to study at our universities, or to simply enjoy being tourists to our amazing land. Africa is abundant in food, natural resources, gold, silver, diamonds, iron, cocoa, tropical fruit, and fertile soil. From ancient times, we have sailed and traveled the world trading our resources, goods, and art with the people of India, China, and the Arab world. In the Middle Ages, when our great civilizations of Ghana and Zimbabwe were at their height, the majority of Europeans were poor, illiterate, oppressed, and disease-ridden. They were serfs, agricultural workers, tied to the land under feudalism with no rights or education. In the 1400s, Europeans began to send ships, cannons, and armies to conquer our gold and our resources, and then African people ourselves. By the end of the century, the slave trade, the massive European assaults, kidnapping, transport, and sale of African human beings was well underway. The European trade in African human beings ripped us from our families, our history, our culture, and murdered at least tens of millions of us. The effect on our African nation was staggering. In the Americas and the Caribbean, we were sold like animals, worked to death, forced to labor for free from pre-dawn to night, tortured and terrorized by people who had the total power of life and death over us. We were slandered, demeaned, robbed of our self-government, our land, and our dignity. We were objects, owned for the pleasure and profit of others. African women were raped, brutalized, and bred like beasts. Our babies were sold on the market. Our families were separated at the whim of the masters. In the Americas, we were branded like cattle, whipped until deep scars covered our backs, forced to wear iron collars around our necks. Thousands of us were hanged from trees, mutilated by dogs, and thrown onto fires to burn to the death. In Africa, hundreds of millions of us who were spared the slave ship were slaughtered and oppressed by the European onslaught of colonialism. Europe carved up our beautiful continent and divided it amongst themselves at gunpoint to steal our resources for the benefit of white people. In the 1890s in Congo alone, 10 million of us were murdered and millions more had our hands chopped off in Belgian King Leopold's rubber plantations. Countless others of us were wiped out in the mines of southern Africa, where white people found gold and diamonds and sent their people to steal our land and build a prosperous life for themselves at our expense. Throughout the 12 million square miles of Africa and everywhere we had been forcibly dispersed, we were a once proud and independent people, now oppressed, powerless, and brutalized. This 600-year assault on Africa gave birth to capitalism. Our enslavement transformed Europe. Europe became wealthy and powerful on the backs of our suffering. Our stolen labor and resources built the palaces of Paris, the boulevards of Berlin, the cathedrals of Britain, and the skyscrapers of New York. It provided the democratic rights and the high standard of living for white working and middle-class people everywhere. African people, wherever we were located, in Africa, in Haiti, in US, and Brazil, we are the most impoverished people in the world. But Africa is not poor. Africa is being looted. It is the richest continent in terms of natural resources, most of which are still undiscovered and unharnessed. 80% of Africans in our motherland must struggle to feed our families at starvation levels. Because of this legacy of slavery and genocide, our children in the United States are being gunned down by police and left to die in the sun, like 18-year-old Mike Brown in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014. We are being slaughtered by white gunmen like the 9 of us at the Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston. We have no power to protect ourselves. We are stopped and frisked by the millions and rounded up and stuffed into prisons. We are homeless and living in tents like in the streets of Haiti. And we are living in shanty towns in Brazil and Jamaica. We are drowning in the Mediterranean and being murdered in the Congo. All over the world, our children go to bed hungry. Everywhere we are, we live poor and oppressed, and we die young.
I want to tell you that despite all of the misinformation that you get about how change has come to America, the reality is different. The reality is, in the United States, 1 out of 8 African men in their 20s is in prison. Today, 45% of the African population in the United States is either in prison or tied to the prison system in some way or another. The lifespan of Africans as compared to white people in the United States is deplorable. Our children die at childbirth 2 times the rate that white children die. So this notion that somehow Africans in the United States have this wonderful situation is a lie.
With the resources and vast size of Africa, we can and must become the most prosperous, healthy, and productive people in the world. Under our own self-government, Africa will be green with agriculture, providing rich nutrition for every African woman, man, and child. Every family will have a secure home with clean running water, sanitation, and electricity. Every child must have her or his rightful future with education based on a curriculum featuring the brilliance and history of African people. We must build our Africa, bustling with African-owned commerce, doctors, hospitals, farmers, pilots, internet specialists, artists, scientists, television and radio stations, teachers, professors, universities, and shop owners in a society in which no one has something at the expense of another. Africa must be free of parasitic settlers and exploiters and African sellouts and neo-colonialists. Everyone in Africa must work for the collective good of all Africa, not for him or herself. Africa's 1 billion strong stands for a society led and constructed around the interests of the African working class and peasants. Africa provides more than 60% of the world's gold and 85% of the world's coltan, the mineral necessary for the functioning of every cell phone and computer. We have so much that we need to build industry and a collective economy that serves our need. This is why we say Africa for the African, at home and abroad. Africa's diamonds for Africans, Africa's gold for Africans, Africa's coltan for Africans. For the past 40 years of the existence of the African People's Socialist Party, we have put our vision of a liberated, independent African economy into a reality. Under the leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela, we have built our own institutions led by and for African working people. We have constructed the magnificent Akwaba halls at our Uhuru House centers in Oakland and St. Petersburg. For more than a quarter of a century, we have operated the popular Uhuru furniture stores in Oakland and Philadelphia, where we also have the One Africa, One Nation marketplace. We have the highly successful Uhuru Foods and Pies in Oakland and St. Petersburg, where we have our own Uhuru Jiko kitchen. We have the Burning Spear newspaper, in print since 1968, and Burning Spear publications. We have the Tyron Lewis Fitness Gym, Planet Uhuru t-shirts, Uhuru News, Uhuru Radio, and will soon launch our new FM station, Black Power 96. We have built the African Socialist International in North America, the Caribbean, Europe, and East, West, and South Africa.
Imperialism will always stand for compromise, or always stand for neocolonialism, but the masses will have nothing to do in such compromise. So we say revolution, but that revolution has to be a worldwide African revolution. You want to unite the whole African world, to unite what's happening in the Congo and develop our consciousness to one Africa, one revolution. It might happen in the Congo right now. Let's make it happen in the Congo. Right? All of us are part of it. Wherever we are part of the same revolution.
Our party is self-sufficient, with the germ of a real independent African economy. We are ready to govern ourselves and determine our own socialist future through our own collective efforts to meet our needs.
African people everywhere, Africans 1 billion strong is your future. By investing in Africans 1 billion strong, you begin to play an active role in shaping and forging our birthright and our destiny, so that not one more generation of African children will grow up hungry, demeaned, or poor. The liberation of our Africa contributes to world peace and the future for all humanity.
Our mission for a liberated Africa encompasses the just struggle for reparations to African people. All of Western capitalism rests on the pedestal of our stolen labor, stolen land, and stolen resources from the broken bodies of our ancestors and the exploited spirit of our dispersed nation. The vision of Africans 1 billion strong revolves around reparations to African people from governments, corporations, and the general white population who have benefited from our suffering, stolen labor, and stolen resources for so long.
On today, we are initiating a 2-day trial of the United States government for crimes it has committed against the black or African population.
Reparations are not charity. As Chairman Omali Yeshitela explained, the objective of reparations, demanding the return of what is rightfully ours, is not to find economic respite in a permanent sea of imperialist rapacity, but to win our liberation and free up the productive forces of Africa and the African people. For corporations and white people, reparations are an investment in a future of peace based on social justice and an end to war, suffering, and poverty built on prosperity for a few at the expense of the majority. Our slogan is Africa for the Africans, those at home and those abroad, the slogan of the worldwide African movement led by the great Marcus Garvey 100 years ago. We are ambitious for nothing less than the total unification and liberation of our Africa and African people in Africa, and wherever we have been forcibly dispersed around the world through the legacy of slavery and colonialism. We are determined to govern and rule ourselves on our land and with our own resources for our own benefit. We will tear down Africa's internal borders imposed on us by foreigners whose only interest was to harm and divide us, to exploit our labor and our land for their own benefit. For 600 years, the labor, knowledge, creativity, and resources of African people have gone to develop life for others, African people everywhere. We did for everyone else. Now we must do it for ourselves.
That's why Africa must unite, and African people all around the world must unite so that we can have a future and our children can have a future. Because the truth of the matter is, there's no black person on the face of the earth that can say with certainty that we know that our child will have a future as it exists today. We have to make that future for ourselves.